Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Chris, I play saxophone, and I like to talk about quality clothing. If you're new to my channel, I hope you take a second to please subscribe if you are interested in checking out my musical ventures as well as my ventures into bettering my wardrobe. Today's topic is my perspective on something that my generation has been asking how the heck we're going to be resolving it, and that is sustainability. And more specifically, as I'm sure you see in the title, it is about attaining a sustainable wardrobe. So that means I'm specifically talking about clothing and what is in our closets and wherever else we store our clothes. It's not outside of that. For me, being born in mid-1996, I'm stuck in the middle between two generations, the millennials and Generation Z. However, both generations are striving to be more sustainable and thereby being more green. But from what I've noticed, because of the whole conflation with the green movement, being sustainable has a bad taste in some people's mouths. And that also means it has a negative connotation for the hyper-consumerism economy. However, I don't want to get too much into politics. That is not meant to be the focus of this video. There's already a huge amount of fire going on surrounding the pandemic and everything else that has happened. Now, I feel like I've personally heard a million answers as to what sustainability is, and though people who want to practice sustainability generally know what the heck they're doing, people who don't know what sustainability is may be confused as to what it means because of all the definitions. So let me read off my list of what I've heard sustainable as. I've heard it as, of course, the preservation of the environment, which includes polluting less, wasting and of course using landfills less, recycling more, protecting all wildlife, of course including ocean life, not wasting the resources we currently have, wanting better standards for everyone on the planet, shifting to green energy, and probably a few other things that I'm missing. Now, one thing I want to mention is that sustainability is generally an amalgamation of all those things I said. To further emphasize one point on polluting less, there is actually a quote that was brought to my attention by Raphael at the Gentleman's Gazette. I will link to his video where he mentioned that over here. And he brought up a quote by a food blogger, Anne-Marie Bonneau, which says, and I want to make sure that I'm getting it right, "We don't need a handful of people doing zero waste perfectly, we need millions of people doing it imperfectly." And the reason why is because if you have a few people doing it perfectly while everyone else is still just nonchalantly wasting stuff, it's still a majority bad result. Whereas if we get a lot of people doing it imperfectly, say not necessarily zero waste, but say they reduce their waste by at least 50%, that's better in the long term because you have a lot of people changing how they waste things. So what can we do in order to have a more sustainable wardrobe? Whether you dress like this, or like this, well, I'll tell you what you have to do. You have to buy clothes that last longer. That's it for today's video. I hope you guys... Nah, I'm just messing with you guys. Now, I will say that the long-lasting portion is key in this conversation, though this conversation is going to be very nuanced. So what can we do to have a more sustainable wardrobe? I have three major points that I want to bring up. The first one is having clothing that has more natural raw materials. The second one is spending nothing and living with what you have. And the final point is buying quality clothing and making sure you're spending with purpose. So now that I've talked about my main points, let's get into the detailed discussion. So the first thing I mentioned was raw materials, and more specifically I mentioned natural raw materials. There is an appeal to synthetic materials because we don't have to wind up using other natural resources in order to produce those fabrics. But what comes out of synthetic fabrics is actually plastics that wind up polluting the environment. And I think that's something we want to avoid as much as possible if we're going to be better sustainable for the environment. So I mentioned natural raw materials because they are biodegradable, while synthetic material generally is not. So what are some of the things we want to look for in our clothing? We want to look for cotton, we want to look for wool, we want to look for linen, and I know this one might turn off some people, but I'm going to say it anyway, is natural animal leather. And I say natural animal leather, it's because think of human skin. Leather is just an animal skin. Vegan leather is actually synthetically produced, and I don't believe it has the same biodegradable properties that animal leather has. Comment down below if I'm wrong. I'm open to all criticisms. Now, there are some fabrics that are synthetically produced but are 100% made of natural materials, and one of those is rayon, also known as viscose. Another reason I talk about natural raw material is because even if we wash them, say through our washing machines, or even if we hand wash them, because all that stuff winds up going down the drain anyway, is that natural materials, because they're biodegradable, we have to worry about how they pollute the environment less. Same thing when we dispose of them. Now, disposing has an even greater effect on the environment as far as I'm concerned, because when you dispose of plastics and synthetic materials, it not only takes a lot longer to degrade, it also winds up affecting the soil that it is buried in. And then of course we know about the effects of throwing out plastic nonchalantly into our ocean simply by some of the pictures we have seen online. Now, I want to be clear about one thing. As far as I know, it is impossible, if not near impossible, to find swimwear that is not made out of synthetic material, and it is made out of nylon. And that's because most of the natural fabrics cannot do well in water. Now I'm going to put a big caveat on this topic, and that is if you are at all allergic to any natural materials, like one specific one or all the varieties of natural materials, then synthetic material is the way to go. Or say you have an allergy to those synthetic materials, then it is best to go with those natural fibers, which is actually my recommendation to begin with. Now, the second point I want to make about having a sustainable wardrobe is spending nothing and preserving the clothing you already have. This was a point brought to me by another YouTuber, Sedona Christina, and she calls herself a sustainable vegan and is practicing imperfectly, of course, zero waste. Now, the point that Sedona Christina brought up in her video, if you're interested in seeing that video, I'll link it up over here, is that if you are maintaining your current wardrobe, you are likely to avoid getting new clothing. Now, I'm going to add a slight little point to the end of that statement. If you absolutely have to get clothes because you've worn through your older clothing, then it is fine to get new clothes. Now, a main point on this discussion is that instead of disposing your old clothing that has worn out, if it hasn't fully worn out, you can actually wind up recycling your clothing in your wardrobe. For example, you can repurpose some of your old clothing. So if we look right here, there's some of the t-shirts I currently wear. On those red hangers, I have those specifically meant for when I'm doing harder labor. And if we look up here, apologies for the sun, those are some of my older t-shirts. Those are specifically meant for when I wear my pajamas. Now, there are other ways to repurpose your old clothes, such as using them for patches on other clothing, or using them as little terry cloths just for cleaning around the house per se. Another thing you can do is hand down some of your clothes to other family members, such as younger members or even older members. For example, this shirt that I'm currently wearing was actually just handed down to me by my dad earlier this week because he no longer needed it. And then tying into that last point of handing an article of clothing down is that for all other purposes, if you can't hand it to someone else, you can donate it, whether it's to a thrift store or to a Goodwill. And additionally, if you have some high quality clothing in your wardrobe, you are likely to find ways to maintain it and to repurpose it, so that way you are also reducing waste in that regard as well. And speaking of high quality clothing, that ties into my last point, which is obtaining a high quality clothing and spending your money purposefully. And what do I mean by spending your money purposefully? I'll put it into 3 simple words. No impulse buying. Impulse buying is generally done when you see an article of clothing because it has a great sale. So say you see something on clearance for 20, 30% off, even 40% off. You are more likely to jump on top of that piece of clothing than buy something for full price. And that is something that the hyper-consumerism economy has instilled within us, that we should all strive to break that habit. So how do you obtain this high quality clothing, you may ask? Well, if you're generally spending more money, you're always likely to get higher quality clothing. Boo! Gotcha, I lied again. Now the actual truth about spending more money is that you are generally getting something that is of higher quality than something from fast fashion. You're not always going to get it. Now let's look at some shoes that I have some knowledge over. First off, let's talk about Gucci and Ferragamo. Those shoes are at a base cost of around $700 US, and that is already a high price to pay for some leather shoes. Now if I talk about Alden, who generally sells their men's dress shoes at just under $600, and Cobbler Union, who sells most if not all their shoes for under $400, we're already looking at a considerably more higher quality product than the Guccis and the Ferragamos. Now, initially, you may wind up scoffing at the price tag that I mentioned on these shoes. However, I want to mention that the longevity on these products is exponentially greater than a shoe that you wind up paying only a quarter of the price for. So look at a Cobbler Union shoe, $400. You wind up paying $100 for a shoe. It's gonna last no longer than 5 years, but it also depends on how hard you wear it. So say you wear those shoes every day, you're likely to go through those in the span of 1 or 2 years, tops. Whereas with the Cobbler Union shoes, if you maintain them well, those are likely to last 1 to 2 generations, maybe even longer depending on how well they're maintained. Now, all 4 of those companies' shoes can have their shoes recrafted, but just because you can recraft something does not mean it is of higher quality. As far as I know, vintage stores and thrift stores will always sell those higher quality pieces of clothing for a lower rate than the brand new pieces of clothing because they've already been used. And that ties into some of the points I'm going to be making about high quality clothing. And the first point is, from what I know about fabrics, is that a more tightly woven fabric is actually sturdier and likely to last longer than your cheaper piece of clothing that is not as tightly woven. And I found a way somewhere on the internet, I can't remember it off the top of my head, about how to check your t-shirts and how tightly woven they are. And the test is, can you see through your darn shirt? Now, I did say t-shirt, but you can do this with most of your shirts. And I noticed this actually on some of my other button-down shirts. The lower quality button-down shirts that I own, I can see through them. I can see the light right through them. Whereas with the higher quality shirts that I have, I can not see the light as easily through them. Now for another raw material, which I have actually discussed in a former video, and if you want to see that, go up to this video over here, is that smooth leather can actually be a difficult thing to see. And I want to mention one tip that I brought up in that video about finding high quality leather. If it is plastic, looks and feels like plastic, you'll want to avoid it. However, I'm not very knowledgeable on suede, so if you're interested on how to figure out what is good quality suede versus what isn't, I'm going to link to that in the description below. Now, I want to bring up something that I mentioned earlier and put a twist on it. So let's keep this in mind. A low quality product will generally not last as long as a high quality product. However, if you manufacture something of low quality raw materials well, and you manufacture something of high quality materials poorly, the low quality raw material product will actually be of higher quality because it is better manufactured than something of lower quality. So that wraps up on the 3 major points I wanted to make in this video. However, I still wanted to take a few more minutes to divulge on a couple of other thoughts. And the second question, which I'm sure some of you might be thinking, is do I have to change my style or look? Keep this in mind. Your style is yours and yours only. No one dictates your style. If you have to remove some articles of clothing from your wardrobe in order to be more sustainable, there are plenty of options out there in the marketplace to be able to adjust your wardrobe and even maintain your style. For me as a musician, I need to uphold a certain appearance standard. This does not mean I'm going to wear a suit and dress shoes all the time. However, this does mean I could wear something a little more dressed down, such as this. Here are some steps I'm going to take to adjust my wardrobe from fast fashion and make it higher quality, more sustainable, and even more. So the first thing I'm going to do to better my wardrobe is purchase more clothing with natural raw materials. And this means I'm going to avoid clothes that have elastic in them, with the exception of socks and underpants, polyester, and nylon. Nylon, of course, I already mentioned, has an exception to that rule when it comes to swimwear. The second thing I'm going to do is refrain from buying low quality clothing. That generally means I'm going to avoid buying graphic tees, and I'm going to shift from buying those into more polo shirts and more button-up shirts. The second point is that I generally avoid fast fashion. And the third point I'm going to make is that I'm going to start shifting away from Men's Wearhouse, which is a large corporation and tends to overcharge for their products, and I'll go to more specialized companies. This is a divergence I'm making from a point I made in a different video, where I said I'm probably still going to be buying from Men's Wearhouse. There are two things, maybe even three things, that I'm going to shift. That these specialist companies for tailoring, I'm looking at places like Spear & Mackay, where even though their prices are generally about the same, if not cheaper, than Men's Wearhouse, the quality of their product is already a step up from Men's Wearhouse. Secondly, I've heard that you should not buy shoes from the same place you buy your suit, because those shoes are of cheap quality. And that's why I mentioned Alden Shoes and Cobbler Union earlier. Those recraftable shoes, though the price tag is 3 to 4 times that of the shoes you see in some place like a Men's Wearhouse, those shoes are going to exponentially outlast the shoes you would get from a Men's Wearhouse or a Joseph A. Bank. And then the final point I'm going to make is that I'm further seeking out quality, doing all the research I need to using the points I have mentioned in this video. First, am I buying this article of clothing because the price looks good, or am I buying it because I'm going to wear it and I'm buying it with intent? Secondly, have I done my research and looked at the raw materials with a fine-tooth comb? And finally, I kind of touched on this in my first point, how often will I wear this piece of clothing, and how long will it last based on that premise? Also, will I be able to repair that piece of clothing, such as shoes, which I can take to a cobbler, or if I mess up a t-shirt or a sweater, will I be able to take that to someone or work on it myself and get it fixed? So those are the points I wanted to touch on in this video. Sustainability is actually a lot more approachable than some people want to make it. It goes back to the entire idea of recycling, but it's not just the recycle portion, because we are forgetting the reducing and reusing portion of the recycling trio. Now, of course, the shift into it is definitely daunting in some regards. But I'm going to take the steps personally to be able to do so, and I implore you all watching this video to do so with me. So thank you to everyone who made it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed watching this video, please drop a like and subscribe to my channel for more content. Also, check out my Instagram, my personal Instagram, which is also my musical Instagram, and my style Instagram, where I will generally post updates on the style videos here on this channel. And with that, I will bid you all adieu. I'll see you all in the next video. Today's topic is something, oh, you didn't have to. Yeah, I'm just get out of the way. Gotcha.